Tonight, family and friends of the victims are grieving tremendously. And a Syracuse friar says he doesn't think it ever gets easier. The 10 victims who were murdered on Saturday, one of them, Roberta Drury, will be laid to rest in central New York this coming weekend. She attended North Syracuse schools and had moved to Buffalo to be with her brother, who was battling leukemia. She was 32 years old. CBS 5's Allure Lagarde is with the Live Eye in Syracuse right now.
Michael, the funeral for Roberta Drury will be held on Saturday here at Assumption Church. One of the friars I spoke to tells me that there are challenges with holding funerals for someone so young. The mass shooting at a Tops in Buffalo took the lives of 10 people, including North Syracuse native Roberta Drury. It has sparked sadness in the state of New York. Drury's family decided to entrust the Assumption Church in Syracuse to hold her funeral. Friar Nicholas Spano, who will be officiating the service, says this is his first time holding a funeral for a mass shooting victim, but not his first for someone so young.
Don't think it ever gets easier. You know, there really is nothing to say. You know, there are no words that convey our sympathy well enough or to alleviate their suffering.
Friar Nicholas says in some cases, this service will be a challenge. He says the church does believe in being together again in the next life and will share that at the funeral, but says we also have to acknowledge the grief and suffering of how Roberta's life ended.
To not let this heinous crime be totally in vain, but to remember her funeral liturgy and all of the music we select, all the readings we select, have to foster that.
Friar Nicholas says many times the family that lost someone is in a state of shock and grief during the funeral. He says the most important thing the church does is try to facilitate and support the family during their time in need.
We can't grieve for you. We can't take your suffering away, but we're here to support you as best as we can.
Once again, the funeral for Roberta Drury will be held here at Assumption Church, and calling hours are tomorrow in North Syracuse.
Ashley Mercer is 6 months pregnant. Last week, she says this shift change at Amazon came out of nowhere, approved for 10 hours parking lot cleanup.
I literally felt helpless, like a pregnant woman in 6 months, you putting her outside. I even felt bad for even coming inside the building because I felt like I was going to get in trouble if I wasn't outside.
That change came the same day Jason Maine was suspended for not using a step stool while moving boxes. He says he was terminated days later. He feels the real reason Amazon let him go was because he spoke of unionizing at the Clay warehouse.
I really feel this is retaliation. I really feel this. Can you guys tell me and show me how it's not? You know what I mean? And they had nothing for that. Just trust us, it's not.
The couple says they've worked for Amazon for 2 years. Before coming to Syracuse, they say they worked in Staten Island, at the same warehouse where workers voted to form the company's first union in the U.S. in April. Mercer and Maine say they were a vocal part of that movement with the Amazon labor union. They were in Syracuse by the time that vote went through, working at the East Syracuse facility in December, where they say they found similar unsafe conditions.
Disability violations, MET violations, COVID violations. To no end, and like they didn't want to talk about any of that.
So they ignored you?
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, they say Amazon transferred them to the Clay warehouse and approached HR about bringing the Amazon labor union here.
You say you want to be the Syracuse's best employer, you know, show me that. Make unionization not a necessary thing.
He says Amazon suspended him days later. This week, the couple submitted a labor complaint to the National Labor Relations Board, alleging Mercer's job change and Maine's termination are directly linked to the union discussion. Back in September, we specifically asked the company how they would respond to talks of unionizing here.
Like I said, our associates, I think, already kind of expressed their opinion, and they're going to continue, and it's up to us to make sure that this happens.
Amazon not responding to our request for comment or an interview today. Maine and Mercer say they're hoping to bring the same folks who had that successful union vote down in Staten Island and bring them up here to Clay.
Killings at the Chili's restaurant in DeWitt says she's come a long way thanks to therapy and medications. But she has a major bone to pick with the New York State Workers Compensation Board. and she's not alone. Late one night in September 2018, Jessica Somm watched as two of her coworkers were shot by a former employee who came to rob the place. The gun was at her head, but it wouldn't fire. Jessica survived with no physical injury, but she's had to do a lot of work on her mental health to get to where she is now. There's one thing about COVID that has been so good for Jessica Somm. The Workers' Compensation Board allowed her to see her therapist and her psychiatrist via telehealth. It put her on a path where she sees a future beyond being the Chili's survivor.
I'm trying to finish up getting my bachelor's so that I can go on to get my master's as a nurse practitioner. I'd love to be a therapist to help some more people like me. I think that people that understand it the best can be the best advocate for others, because if you don't know it, you don't know it. If you don't know how this feels, don't imagine how it feels.
Before the pandemic, telehealth represented less than 1% of care for mental health concerns. And at its pandemic peak, Kaiser Family Health reports it was 40% of all visits.
I mean, I still have my days where leaving the house is a challenge. So if I need to switch my appointment instead of going into his office, he's totally fine with doing it virtually, because he knows that I still have days where I don't want to get out.
Jessica and many others are puzzled and upset by a regulation the State Workers' Compensation Board is looking to change. It wants to require every third visit be in person. Her psychiatrist is in Binghamton. The therapy provided is working, and so are the meds prescribed by the doctor. Forcing her to go in person would be a burden, she says.
It would be really, really hard for me. How would I get my medication? What if I couldn't go see my therapist because he had COVID or I had COVID or whatever else happens? If I couldn't go see him every week, that would be really hard. So, I mean, who knows what could happen if I don't want to think about it, and I'm hoping that maybe they start to use their head and not do this horrible thing to people.
The attorneys who have been working Jessica's compensation case since just after the murders at the Chili's restaurant say a change forcing psychologically injured clients into in-person visits could be catastrophic for some. And they claim it's all about money. Workers' comp cases are built on reports from doctors. No visit, no report, no payout. Bethany Nicoletti is an attorney on Jessica's team.
Certainly with orthopedic injuries, a physical examination is important. But that's not true for a psychological injury. There's no distinction in this law for psychological conditions. You don't need to physically examine somebody to help them cope with a mental condition.
If these people don't have anyone else besides their therapist to talk to, yeah, they could probably go in a fairly dark spot. I 1,000% understand that, because at the beginning of this, yeah, I went into a pretty dark spot where that could have been a possibility for sure. Because it took a long time to find a therapist to begin with, because workers' comp is very complicated with that. Not many providers take it to begin with. So when you find one that you can go to and they're willing to do the virtual stuff, that's pretty terrible for workers' comp to take that away from them.
Jessica's legal team sees money as a possible motivation for dialing back the full, unrestricted access to exclusive telehealth therapy. If clients can't get into treatment or get easy access to it, attorneys can't pursue their claims. For its part, the Workers' Compensation Board told us, as we continue to shape final telehealth regulations, the Workers' Compensation Board is sensitive to the needs of New Yorkers who receive health services across great distances, including psychological services. And the board points out tonight its proposal has been revised so a doctor or a therapist can request prior authorization for fewer in-person visits. Jessica and her attorneys see that as more of a paperwork problem and a hassle that she and others like her don't need as they're trying to get better.